Will Amari Cooper help fantasy teams win on his new team? That more this week on the couch. Theo Gremminger, Theo, the OG. Amari Cooper, is this the more impactful trade of the two big wide receiver trades we saw this week?
I think wide receiver wise, I think it is. The Amari Cooper goes from like the the worst possible situation with a Cleveland offense that can't protect the quarterback, and Amari's sitting there in like, do you ever start him purgatory? I believe he's like wide receiver 43 in points per game. To go into a situation where I think he is actually going to change the way the Buffalo Bills play offense. They're second to last in terms of pass attempts per game. I think having Amari Cooper, I likened it to almost like we have to go way back in time. It's sort of like when Amari Cooper went from the Raiders to the Cowboys,
hmm
where we sort of forgot about him, but then he gets to a team where they all of a sudden are like, we're using this guy every single week, and he gained all that fantasy value right away for you. So it's a massive bailout for Amari Cooper fantasy managers. And I think for like the Buffalo Bills in general, the way they were playing really capped their ability to make a deep run in the playoffs. Now I think they're a little bit back to where they were sort of when they had Stephon Diggs,
Right.
and losing Diggs and Gabe Davis in the same off season for Josh Allen. I think that was a really tough putt. Certain guys played well. Khalil Shakir had his moments, but this is like they've got a proper wide receiver one now. So I was really excited about this one. Really excited.
Yeah, this is perfect, really. It's kind of like course correction for not really doing anything. As you said, a tough putt. I like that. I'm going to steal that it's because this was an offense, as you said, once Khalil Shakir was out, it was like the air went out of the balloon. And you saw how easy it was to defend Josh Allen. And like you said, it changes the structure of the offense. Because what I've been grappling with, Theo, is this is a everyone's going to eat offense. But that was without an alpha like Amari Cooper. And Josh Allen is very good at making aspirational throws. The kinds of throws we saw Joe Flacco making to Amari Cooper when Amari Cooper was a golden ticket to the fantasy finals before he got banged up. And maybe it's not an everybody eats offense when you have that kind of player outside. And for Amari Cooper, Theo, I'm just trying to simulate this because I love that you went back to the Raiders, right? For his career, right? And you think of teams like a family, and he's just been in all these dysfunctional families: the Raiders, the Cowboys, now the Browns. This is by far the closest he's been to really entertaining the idea of playing in the Super Bowl. So he has to be invigorated. Everyone's citing all these drop stats. I wouldn't care if I was playing with Deshaun Watson either.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I mean,
it's
the whole thing in like Cleveland is just in such bad shape now. It's sort of like an afterthought. But if you watch a full Cleveland game, I mean, it's really
it's
awful. So
depressing.
it's absolutely depressing. It's just terrible, and they can't make the quarterback switch. Whatever's going on there. So yeah, this is incredible for Cooper. I'm really excited to see like the effect on the offense. I thought that it was such an emotional release for Josh Allen. You saw how hard he's having to work
Yeah.
by the way he reacted to how they won on Monday night. This mattered to him. Certainly, it's a divisional game. It's Aaron Rodgers. I get it. It's a 3-point win, but to see him have that sort of uh, energy at the end of the game, it's like get this guy wide receiver and let's sort of maybe take off with this team.
Yeah, he has the expectations of an entire city on his shoulders. And the pain and suffering of that city for decades, and he takes it on. I think he genuinely takes it on, and now he has some help. And then the other one, and I love Aaron Rodgers, kind of like Alfred E. Newman shrugging. I have all this power. Why do people think I have all this power? I'll tell you why. Because they have a receiver that they didn't really need, but for fantasy, we have to sort through this. So Davante Adams reunited, and it feels so good. Maybe not for everybody on the Jets, and certainly not for fantasy players.
So this one was it's a tough one to process. I think that there's the argument that the pie grows larger is probably there, and I see all the issues with like, hey, this doesn't do anything for the offensive line. Well, having two wide receivers who are able to get open is going to help, especially when Aaron Rodgers is getting the ball out so quickly. I actually thought Todd Downing, we were ready to bury the guy. I was very like it was sort of like a joke, like the Jets love having play callers who have finished close to the bottom of the NFL in terms of scoring. But Downing, like, he looked very rational and had self-preservation with his play calling, where 5 out of the first 6 touches of the game go to Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. That's like exactly what we wanted to
Right.
see for fantasy football. And then they make this big move. So for me, it's like the pie probably grows larger. And this one is the Jets are have the, I believe they're third highest in terms of pass attempts per game. It's like 37 and a half. But over the last 3 games, because of the Minnesota game, they're like 43 and a half attempts a game. So I think like this is going to really help with that. Garrett Wilson, though, I see a ton of mental gymnastics here from people trying to say, hey, I'm not going to get too affected by this one. I
Mm,
don't know, Sig. I mean, he
mhm.
leads the NFL in targets. He has a 29% target share. This is a guy where we had several weeks where we were really, really kind of worried and upset. And then the last 2 weeks have just been about as good as it gets collectively. Now you have Davante Adams, where it's a one of the best target earners we've ever seen. He's at 169 targets or more for 3 straight seasons heading into this year. That's crazy. And also the Aaron Rodgers loves him. They talk about each other glowingly. There's massive connections between the two of them. And then I hear the other argument where, hey, it doesn't also matter for Garrett Wilson because uh, his floor is going to be what we see with Lazard, like
Mhm.
mid wide receiver too. But it's like that's sort of saying that Alan Lazard is going to completely disappear, which I don't see either. So I don't know. Garrett Wilson is too talented to like to get nuked, but he's a guy where we need to kind of adjust our expectations weekly. And Sig, when you've got
Yeah.
like a key third down and the game is on the line, Aaron Rodgers is going to be looking for Davante Adams. It's just muscle memory to him
Mhm.
at this point. So I think Breece Hall is a winner here because the discrepancy that we saw with the Braylon Allen usage versus the Breece Hall usage in Downing's first game, we saw it go way back to Breece Hall. He had a number of touches. They're
Right.
using him. And if the pie grows larger and this team takes a step forward offensively, I think Breece Hall, we could kind of look, if we look at this season as like a journey, then those 2 really rough weeks we're going to look back at them and say, wow, we went through those, but then Breece Hall really did give us potentially league winning upside at the running back position.
Yeah, it's funny when you do that circuitous journey that you just outlined, how we have to remember this, that the league, the season works. Matt Waldman put in my head a long time ago that it's 4 week chunks. And you can be, another thing I like to say, Theo, is you can be right and then wrong and then right during a season on your player takes, and being agile, being flexible, adjusting to changing conditions, and being willing to act on limited evidence or sometimes no evidence of what you believe is true is one of the keys in fantasy football leagues. And Brees Hall was dead in the water. I mean, there are things that happen. If this Davante Adams trade doesn't happen, then maybe these things continue. But I think you're right about Garrett Wilson. I don't think the answer is trade him away, because even
No,
if you find that one person who's kind of optimistic, you're just going to gain a few cents on the dollar. But still, if Garrett Wilson's talent is just that overwhelming, or if Davante Adams gets hurt or Alan Lazard gets hurt, then you're giving up more than the little bit you're pocketing by saying it's going to be really bad and people just think it's going to be kind of bad or not bad at all. But really, we're in the head of Aaron Rodgers. That's the part that makes this difficult, because again, leading off the take here with Aaron Rodgers has all this power, and like you said, you're appealing to personal relationships. And then, here I am, mayor of Narrative Street. This stuff matters in fantasy football, and if you don't think it matters in fantasy football, we don't even end up here without this stuff. We don't even end up with Aaron Rodgers, with Alan Lazard, now with Davante Adams, if it wasn't for the personal relationships. But I mean, the AFC is wide open. Woody Johnson's not wrong in the sense that they should just throw everything they have to try to get in the playoffs and see what can happen, because it's hard to think there are more than 4 or 5 playoff teams in the AFC, but there's 7. The Jets, we're going to have to watch this blueprint, Theo, against the Steelers on Sunday night. I'm a neurotic Steelers fan, and I'm even more neurotic after this week. And I guess if there are worse places to be in than in the head of Aaron Rodgers, then it's in the head of Arthur Smith or Mike Tomlin. Sounds like, I don't know if we have 100% confirmation on this, Theo, but it sounds like it's going to be Russell Wilson. Anything? Is this a nothing burger for fantasy? Because hey, okay, now you can't use Justin Fields. That's it, or is there something to this move?
I I mean, it shows that they have zero respect for this thing of ours, Sig.
Yeah.
benching Justin Fields we want in our lineups in order to put in Russell Wilson, who nobody wants a part of. I had this conversation a couple weeks back with Jax Falcone, Scott Bullinger of the Undroppables, who's just great. This was in a kind of a dynasty context of Justin Fields gained this value, and then there's the looming threat of Russell Wilson. There's the devil's advocate for us as fantasy managers is maybe we see that huge George Pickens game that we've been waiting for. Maybe Russell Wilson can sort of unlock that, and we see a big Pickens game. So it's like one door closes for us in fantasy. We lose a quarterback, but we gain yet another wide receiver in Pickens. For me, it's sort of like this must be just Tomlin's guy. And this is what I think they wanted in the preseason. Justin Fields won enough games. You have to think maybe if Justin Fields didn't drop those two close losses, maybe they beat the Colts. He's still the starting quarterback. It's sort of like the cumulative effect. I think it's for us in terms of the other pieces, stuff stays pretty much the same. But I do think that there's a door slightly opening up for George Pickens. The narrative could change a little bit with him.
Yeah, we mentioned Mike Tomlin. If you listen to Tomlin's comments, it sounds like he's saying basically, well, let's just see what happens. He doesn't seem like he's sold that this is going to change things. He wants to see if it's going to change things. They know what they have in Justin Fields. And I think that Justin Fields, I mean, I'm a fan of a Steelers team that should have made a Super Bowl or two with Cordell Stewart. And Cordell Stewart was limited as a passer to read the field or sit in the pocket. But when you have a defense, when you have some skill players, you can still make the Super Bowl in the NFL with that limit. Colin Kaepernick almost won a Super Bowl in the power outage game in New Orleans. We all saw how limited he was. I don't know if Arthur Smith's the right guy to create the structure around Justin Fields, but we saw what we saw. I think that Russell Wilson is going to, I think we're going to see Justin Fields in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Simply because what have we seen from Russell Wilson other than playing outside of structure on a terrible Denver team, not getting the trust of Sean Payton? He never really ran Sean Payton's offense. He was just there. We thought that Sean Payton wanted to work with Russell Wilson. Ends up he was never sold. He never wanted Russell Wilson, and this was inevitable that this is where we were going to be. And I think Russell Wilson's probably riding on a reputation at this point, but that just shows you where the Steelers' offense is.
Yeah.
You mentioned Cleveland games are depressing, but I'll tell you this. Watching Nick Chubb is not depressing.
No.
Not depressing. How much imagination should we have when we picture the impact that Chubb could have? Maybe not for the Browns, maybe for the Browns, certainly for our fantasy teams.
I think we have to temper our expectations. I think if he's able to handle a full workload, I think they're going to give it to him and try to steady the waters. He could be the player that sort of like evens things out for Cleveland a little bit, adds that threat. Now you have no Amari Cooper. Maybe he opens things up a little bit for David Njoku as a primary threat as a receiver. I don't know. It's a really tough one. We first off, we don't know how much of a workload Nick Chubb can handle right off the top. Do we see a game where it's like Nick Chubb with some Deonta Foreman and Pierre Strong? You've got Jerome Ford banged up. I love Nick Chubb, and I think this is one where you want to get really, really excited, and you sort of always have nostalgia when it comes to players like him. But the situation he's in now is certainly different than what we saw at the beginning of last season when he looked like he was going to end up being something massive for us and steamed up in ADP and all that. So for me, I'm tempering expectations with sort of all Cleveland Browns, even Nick Chubb. But it would be very cool to see in the year of like the really old running back to see Nick Chubb come and do his thing and maybe give us like instant RB2 production right out the gate. That would be fantastic. But I want to kind of temper it a little bit,
Yeah.
Sig, because that team it doesn't look like they're going to support much of anything. It's just it seems like a train wreck there. It seems like until they make the quarterback switch, at least attempt something, they're sort of just stuck in the mud. Nothing's going well for them. They have all the injuries in the secondary. Yeah, for me, I want to temper expectations, but it would be very cool to see Nick Chubb come back, and we're certainly all rooting for him.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very easy player to like, no matter what your fan base is or your allegiance. Nick Chubb is like one of those guys. He's like a pure runner, one of the better runners we've seen maybe in the last 10 years as just a pure running back. So absolutely rooting for him, Sig, but
Hmm.
I don't think you want to do you. I mean, you could use him as in your terms, he's like a what the heck
Right,
flex.
right.
He's not a locked in anything.
This week, and Cincinnati is a good matchup. And I like to take the walk down narrative street that this team, again, teams are families, and it's sad. Kevin Stefanski, blink twice if you're okay. If they lock you in there at night or something, because it's clear that I don't think he has any say over who the quarterback is, and that stuff affects the team. And that's why like you were saying, these games are depressing. At the very least, Nick Chubb could be a shot in the arm and get them back to playing the kind of football that got them to the playoffs last year. This team, the run defense is still very good. And Miles Garrett can still, even though he's playing on two bum wheels, he can turn a game. Maybe the team takes on the personality of Nick Chubb instead of, I don't even think they're taking on the personality of Deshaun Watson. It's more like Deshaun Watson's personality or Deshaun Watson's fate is sinking the team down to the bottom of the ocean with him, and the ownership is just not willing to say that you might not be able to cut him because of cap implications, but you can bench him. There's no law against that, because that's the thing. If you tell me in your crystal ball that Jameis Winston is going to take over week 8, week 9, now I'm a lot more excited about Nick Chubb. And he has been the kind of player that has, I was thinking with the picture in my head, Theo, was Frank Gore on some of those terrible San Francisco teams. Do you remember how bad some of those teams were? When
I
he's
love
putting
that
up
analogy. That's a great analogy.
1,500, 1,600 total yard seasons on a terrible team. So, but Nick Chubb has to overcome physiology. He's done it before. He has to overcome the vibes of this team. Ugh, we'll see about that. But there's one other player that everyone's been waiting on. And if your strategy was the TJ Hockenson strategy, you kind of already won because you probably didn't spend an early pick on a tight end. Although George Kittle looks pretty good. Kelsey could come around. Um, what about TJ Hawkinson? And you mentioned this with Chubb, and I just want to put this out there. I do think that we've seen teams getting smarter about injury returns. I'm noticing a lot more players this year, Theo, coming back, and because I used to have for the longest time, when players come back from a multi-week absence, we're going to be very conservative about that first week back because there's extra risk because they might not be 100%. Let's watch and see if they get in a full practice. And I've noticed whether it's Joe Mixon or Christian Watson, I've noticed players getting back on the field from these injuries and looking exactly like they did before the injury. So I hope that's what's happening with Nick Chubb. I hope that's what's happening with TJ Hawkinson. What's happening for your fantasy team if you've been waiting on Hawkinson?
Well, I think you nailed it. From a game theory perspective and just how we play fantasy as a weekly game, you avoided the landmines. A lot of people had the plan where I'm going to kind of Tyler Conklin my way to TJ Hawkinson. I'm going to maybe get a Pat Fryermuth and have it be a bridge to TJ Hawkinson. And then there's some teams out there, Sig, that said, I'm going to wait and I'm going to take Brock Bowers and I'm going to double tap it with TJ Hawkinson. So there's a lot of teams out there like that. I know because I have a couple of TJ Hawkinson teams like that where it's turned out to be an excellent strategy because you avoid the landmines, you get access to a number of these wide receivers who maybe hit, a number of these running backs who have hit came in that sort of range of the draft. Certainly, there
Mm-hmm.
was a few quarterbacks that hit as well, where you were having to push up tight end. So then you get back a TJ Hawkinson who averaged 14 and a half points per game last year. And the other narrative with Hawkinson in the preseason was he's going to have to deal with terrible quarterback play, and this offense is going to take a step back, which has been absolutely the opposite. Sam Darnold has just been terrific in almost every single game, and now you have Hawkinson stepping into a fully functional offense with strong offensive line play, a strong quarterback, and those Detroit games get a little bit easier and a little more shootouty with no Aiden
Mm.
Hutchinson as well. So there's the whole there and Green Bay. Those games are kind of
Yeah.
shootouty too. So this has turned into a really fun division. And yeah, I'm with you. I think TJ Hawkinson, the cautiousness that they have with him, slow playing him, is really going to pay off. And that's going to be an offense that's going to be really difficult to deal with over the second half of the season. I'm really interested to see how they look coming out of a bye week. I think a lot of times we've seen these teams that know what they're doing making these little wrinkles and adjustments, self-scouting out
Right.
of bye weeks. And I think Minnesota is certainly one that's going to do that. So I'm thrilled about TJ Hawkinson. I think if you have him, you're like, if as long as you weathered the storm and you're sitting there 500, you've got a chance this year with all the attrition and all the craziness.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think there was something about Hawkinson's profile that was overlooked because some of the Vikings beat writers back in August, I think one of them said he's going to have 1,000. He's not going to start the season with the team, but he's going to have 1,000-yard season. And there were a lot of fantasy writers dunking on him, like I have good money that he's not going to have 1,000-yard season. And obviously, it would be quite a tremendous accomplishment if he did. But we were missing the headline in there, which is this is somebody that covers the team every day saying he's fundamental, foundational in this offense. And that wasn't the only beat writer that said it. The other beat writer put a number on it, but all of the beat writers said Hawkins is not going to return until midseason. But when he's back, he's going to be an essential part of the team. You also saw Kevin O'Connell jokingly saying that he really wanted Hawkins. He's watching Hawkinson on the high side field. He really wanted Hawkinson back out there. He was even going to kind of pressure the trainers, haha, not really, to accelerate his timeline. But that's Kevin O'Connell telling you they've always loved throwing to Hawkinson. I love that you mentioned because we got Minnesota, Detroit this week. That's your main event, or Houston, Green Bay, another main event on the Sunday schedule. And yes, it matters that the NFC North is the best division in football. Is that right,
Yeah.
Theo?
I mean, I think when you also throw the improved Chicago Bears into the equation,
Yeah.
4-2 heading into their bye, and we get the Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels Bowl in week 8. Yeah, I think that this division is every game is going to be really, really a strong one for. So yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Detroit, Minnesota. If I told you this was going to be one of the biggest games that you're going to circle for the season, you would have kind of maybe raised an eyebrow
Right.
in the preseason when we lost JJ McCarthy and there was sort of the negativity. But yeah, this is going to be a great game and the kind of game we want to see for fantasy football because it seems like an over environment, a game we're going to get a lot of points. Detroit, I mean, talk about a team that looked strong coming out of a bye week. Last week was like everything you'd ever want to see as a
Oh
Lions
gosh.
fan. Masterclass by Ben Johnson, and the ultimate revenge game too, where they play a team that beat them 2019 the season before, and you can just hear Dan Campbell all during the bye week with like essentially 2 weeks to prepare for Dallas. That this team beat us last year. We're gonna just
Yeah.
grab them by the throats this game, and they did. And the Sewell play, late in the game,
Yeah.
uh, you don't see that too often. Running a hook and ladder up that big to your offensive lineman. I mean, they were just toying with Dallas. So yeah, that's a really really strong one. And now you get the same narrative where Minnesota's had a number of an extra couple of days to prepare for this opponent. So we should get a really 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 fun football game.
Oh man, yeah. And I love that Dan Campbell, even after Aiden Hutchinson goes down, still you can say maybe not worried about angering the football gods. Perhaps you might even say the football gods would smile on him. I mean, wouldn't the football gods say go for the throat? Wouldn't the football gods say that if you can humiliate an opponent, not just defeat them, but humiliate them? I mean, there's the physical domination side to football, but when you add in psychological domination, then that's checkmate. And Dan Campbell, for all the love and all of the warm fuzzy things about that team and the family that team is, they're out for blood. And I don't think that Aiden Hutchinson, the loss of Hutchinson, is going to diminish that at all. If anything, it's going to intensify it. But then you also have this Minnesota team that, one of the things I want to say as an aside, and I said this with Cecil, because we just didn't Robert Kraft just say, oh, yeah, I gave Bill Belichick all the power and maybe it was a mistake in hindsight? That came out, Robert Kraft saying that. Not that we didn't know that. But I think the Emperor model is has no clothes, right? I mean, it's not the model. Bill Parcells, you name it. Now it's Sean Payton in Denver. Um, it's run out of mileage, and the
Yeah.
organizations I think that we're seeing excel are the collaborations between the front office and the coaches. You even saw last year Kirk Cousins little bit complaining about Brian Flores and his defense and how they practice and how can you install an offense when you're practicing against a defense that's doing this. And he also said that, hey, it helps you because you're ready for anything because of what Flores throws at you. But I think obviously the pieces of this team are all fitting together from a personality standpoint, from a philosophy standpoint, and from how they play. That, I mean, yeah, Minnesota Detroit is a game with Super Bowl implications. And even if you play it out, Theo, who do we want to see in the playoffs? Well, I don't. Washington, we want to see them in the playoffs. At-
100%.
Atlanta, or Tampa. I think we want to see Tampa in the playoffs with Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield's for real. Do we even need to spend any time on that? I mean,
No.
what he's done so far, he will continue to do. Is that crazy?
Yeah. No, I believe I believe it was you talking about Baker Mayfield can get you through in single QB leagues rest of the way, and just gives you an edge. Mayfield, the Liam, and that's another one. Liam Cohen, just that offense just rolling. So yeah, I'm with you. Like Tampa is sort of must see TV now. All their games are exciting. That Saints game was absolutely wild last
Mm,
week, just with all the crazy plays and everything. So yeah, no, I'm with you. And yeah, the like you said, it's the Super Bowl implications, these two teams sort of coming on their own. Uh, I can't wait for it. And I think
yeah.
Minnesota is capable of making a deep run. And you mentioned sort of Brian Flores and that defense. That's really, really strong. So yeah, I'm with you. It's a wild NFC. I think if you look at it, Detroit might be the favorite right now. Detroit, Minnesota, whoever
Mhm.
wins that game kind of has bragging rights right now.
Yeah, it's fun, and the two conferences couldn't be more different because I think on the AFC side, as I mentioned earlier, you've got Buffalo, you've got Houston, you've got Baltimore, you've got Kansas City, and honestly, I don't think there's another team like the Steelers. I don't know that looks like a quote unquote playoff team. I can't. The Chargers. I mean, this is what we're. I mean, these are your road playoff teams in the wild card round, right? So you might as well just fast forward to the next round of the playoffs. But on the NFC, you've got Washington, you've got all four teams in the NFC, you've got Tampa, and you've got Atlanta coming on, and then of course San Francisco. So that's 8 teams. The math is one of those teams isn't going to make the playoffs, and any of those teams could be a legitimate if Caleb Williams continues to grow as he has over the last couple of weeks. And this is a great example too of the season's going to continue to move in these 4-week chunks. First 3 weeks, even in the Colts game, you would say, well, that was garbage time. That's not real. That's not Caleb Williams making progress. Well, I guess it was because the last 2 weeks but is it the schedule? Look at a team like Seattle. They look like they were going to be a running game defense team. Oh, it just happened that they played Denver and New England to open the season. And even against New England, they couldn't establish the run because Kenneth Walker was hurt. So things change. We mentioned Tampa. Let's talk some waiver wire stuff,
Sure.
Theo. Sean Tucker. Okay. Now, on one hand, talk about a wild game, like you said. And really quick on the Baker Liam thing, because I'm the mayor of Narrative Street. Liam Cohen said he took that job to work with Baker Mayfield again. That matters. That stuff matters
Yeah.
in fantasy football. And maybe it didn't make you take Baker Mayfield as quarterback 20 off the board or whatever. But when he looked really good in week one, it should have got your attention. It should have gotten your attention and said, maybe this is going to be different than what we expected. This offense is a juggernaut. Now, this backfield is a juggernaut. Greg Auman covers the team, said this morning, and Todd Bowles, who's always real upfront with us, he says, three-headed monster, our favorite kind of fantasy football backfield. And Greg Auman this morning said, well, he thinks that Rashad White will be up first. And a certain news aggregator said he's still the lead back. I don't know about that. He
I
said
don't
he
know
will be,
either.
he said he'll be up first, but he would do well to be productive, and that Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker have earned their shares. So thinking about this moving target, because this kind of goes back to before the season when we stare at all of our draft prep, but then things move. It's a moving target once the season starts. You see the direction this is going. I see Greg as saying, without coming out and saying it, that Rashad White is actually on the shakiest footing of the three running backs. There's also something here with Tucker. The longer you play fantasy football, you see when someone comes out and puts up 150 plus total yards on like 15, 16 touches, you don't argue with that. But three-headed committees, you do argue with that. Where are we at? Do we want to underpay for Tucker, overpay for Tucker, let somebody else handle it, or make him yours?
Well, I included him in my I do the waiver wire column at Player Profiler, and I do a top 10 overall. Shout out to you, Sig. I know you've been doing the
Yeah.
waiver wire for, I have these conversations with John Daigle. It's sort of like a labor of love to do the
Hmm.
waiver wire for so long. You can't really get away from it. It's got to come out at the same time. And a hat tip to you. But I said with Sean Tucker, it's sort of like this whole idea that you need to tread lightly with adding him to your team because, like you said, the guy played 27 snaps. He only got this many touches. I think it's a little bit crazy because these coaches see it as well. And Sean Tucker made the team as an undrafted free agent. They gave him one of those strong deals. They gave him a 6-figure signing bonus to come and be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. And this is a guy who was a star in college. It's not like some guy who was an unknown. He didn't get drafted because he had a health concern. It wasn't like, and it wasn't a knee. It was an
Right.
internal. Correct me
Yeah.
if I'm
Heart.
wrong. It was a heart. Okay, so it was a
Hmm.
heart thing, where some teams just had him on the do not draft list. Bucks get him, and then he doesn't do much last year. But they still would always kind of mention him this past offseason, and then he does this. So for me, you mentioned this offense is a juggernaut. We want pieces of this
Right.
offense, and we want to see the way the chips fall. You can't go get Chris Godwin; he's going to cost you a fortune. I can't go get Mike Evans; he's going to cost me a lot. Baker Mayfield's cost has gone up, but I can get Sean Tucker off the waiver wire. And if Rashad White feels the pressure to maybe come back a little too quickly, then this is a guy that could break down again. Bucky Irving looks awesome, but Bucky Irving is not built to be a back that can sustain a massive amount of weekly touches. Sean Tucker, Bucky Irving somewhat split in a 60-40 split. That would be exciting for us in fantasy. It's the age of the running back by committee. A lot of the guys we're starting on a week in, week out basis as our RB2 or maybe our flex are already in a committee. But Tucker did something last week where if I went and took a number of these other backs on other teams and I said go get me 192,
Right.
they're not going to do it. The guy looked
Yeah.
great. So and these coaches are human as well. If somebody does that, and Sig, you bring up the locker room a lot. If a guy goes and gets 192, the entire defense is like, let's just get this guy a couple more touches this week. He makes our job easier. How can you put that back in the box? I think you're going to see a little bit more Sean Tucker. He's earned it, and sort of let's see the way this thing goes. So it's a really fun week for waiver wire running backs, and I think
Hmm.
people are going to have basically do like mental gymnastics to figure out how much to bid on Sean Tucker. I think he's really a price check guy. You don't want guys in your league to get him for free. If you don't believe in him, you still want to put that small bid out there to make sure somebody doesn't luck into potential weekly flex play.
Yeah. Well, and he's the one of the three that hasn't been on the injury report lately, also. So the Rashad White thing, I feel like I like how you bring up the human part of this because in some ways I think we're overthinking this. Um, Rashad White did eventually come around last year, but why did he even get the chance to come around? Because they didn't have alternatives.
Yeah.
Now they do. And Liam Cohen said, again, Narrative Street, Liam Cohen said in the offseason, I bring this up so many times, but sometimes I think this is, I like to say, Theo, I like to say the secrets of the universe aren't secret. Some of these edges in fantasy football, it's not about coming up with some metric that does 8 derivatives of yards per carry. It's just listen to the coaches, watch the games. And Liam Cohen said, the way Bucky Irving runs the ball, fast to and through the hole, that's what we want in our running game. Rashad, we want to get him there. Other running backs, we want to get them there. So the writing was on the wall, and Rashad White did not come out and pattern his style after Bucky Irving. The Sean Tucker part was unforeseeable, but I think you're right because for instance, you mentioned the running backs this week. Like this, I'm not interested in a San Francisco running back. Let someone else pick up a San Francisco. I'm not interested in a Jacksonville running back. Let someone else pick up. I might be interested in Tyler Goodson. Let's talk on Tyler Goodson really quickly because it comes out this morning that Trey Sermon's got a shoulder issue. Team has Evan Hall. Went down with that injury last year, the knee injury, but not a lot of buzz there. They signed Salvin Ahmed, so that they're showing you with their personnel moves. Jonathan Taylor also not exactly committing to playing this week. Tyler Goodson for a 1-week pickup or for somebody who could create momentum the same way that Sean Tucker did. Are you interested?
I had him a little bit lower than Sean Tucker, obviously on the totem pole, because Tyler Goodson to me, he's given us these 2 back-to-back weeks. He's shown receiving ability, and this is an offense where the Shane Steichen offense has produced running back production multiple times with multiple different players. We saw last year with the Zach Moss. We saw Trey Sermon get us 18 fantasy points, and obviously Jonathan Taylor is Jonathan Taylor. But Tyler Goodson in a game where they're going to play Miami, and this is a guy coming off of 55 yards, 65 yards, back-to-back weeks, and now he's going to possibly have it to himself. This is one where, yeah, I'm into it. I think I'm
Hmm.
into it as like a weekly spot start. Um, I don't know the longevity of this, but Jonathan Taylor, this is a guy that's missed time now for 2 straight years. Trey Sermon's banged up. Stranger things have happened. This is like Tyler Goodson's been a guy. There's always been sort of like a Tyler Goodson hive ever
Hmm.
since he came into the league. And this is a talented guy. So he's getting his opportunity in an offense that's given us running back production for multiple people. Yeah, I'm in on it. And I think, like you said, this is a week where there's so many running backs that and a lot of guys who are sort of like the low hanging fruit, like no brainer type additions. Ty Chandler,
Hmm.
Tyler Algier is getting cleaned up in a lot of leagues where Tyler Goodson's going to cost you minimal fab and be a guy you can maybe put in your lineup for like a 1 week start that might turn into two.
Yeah, and or more. I mean, so many more developments. We're only at the beginning of week 7, and think of how many things have already happened. How many teams have already had at least 2 acts in their season already? We mentioned some of these teams: Seattle, Atlanta. They're playing each other this week. These teams where, if you base everything on the first 3 weeks or the last 3 weeks, you're going to get very different ideas of where these teams are headed. And I'm so glad you mentioned Shane Steichen. I always like to take a moment out to recognize that, in fantasy football now, play callers, offensive coordinators, Liam Cohn, we mentioned. It's part of the vernacular because we understand that it's usually part of the story of why things are going well or why things are not going well. And Shane Steichen, I still think this offense is a sleeping giant. And let me ask you this before I start on my spiel. Anthony Richardson, let me take your temperature on Anthony Richardson, because some people are saying what a disappointment. Others are saying wait and see. Others saying maybe there's more there than he's being given credit for.
I think that seeing Joe Flacco come in and be very functional with the same offense was tough to see. Richardson, one thing that we didn't kind of bake in was the youth.
Hmm.
Beginning of the season, we're so enthusiastic about drafting him, and the two youngest starting quarterbacks this year, Caleb Williams and Anthony Richardson. If you want to look at it as like a season narrative, Sig,
Yeah.
Caleb Williams had his rough patch. Now we've
Hmm.
seen two back to back weeks. Maybe Anthony Richardson, because when he
Hmm.
went out of the Pittsburgh game, I know it's super small sample size, but it was a 50% completion rate guy that started the game out 3 for 4 passing, then
Yeah.
gets knocked out of the game. So I think the jury is still sort of out on Anthony Richardson, but there is a lifeline there where we've seen the guy take over a game fantasy wise. He still was coming back from injury. The season is still young. Like you said, this offense actually has a lot of pieces. Like you came on my show this past summer and you sung the praises of Josh Downs. You were one of the only ones this summer really talking about him. And I was sort of with you on that one. Josh Downs is extremely underrated talent. You've also got Michael Pittman. When Jonathan Taylor comes back, this is a team that down the stretch could be a lot of fun. So I'm not ready to write the story on Anthony Richardson. It was certainly a disappointing start, but like you said, it's only week 7, and he's so young,
Yeah.
such a young player. So um, I'm sort of with you there. I'll take some cautious optimism moving forward with Anthony Richardson. That's sort of my approach with him.
Yeah. Well, be open to it. And
Yes.
bringing up Caleb Williams is perfect. And again, there's a reason I'm pivoting to Anthony Richardson in this discussion of things will continue to change. We didn't just hit cruising altitude and everything's going to be like this until week 17. And I don't know what the stat was, Theo, like 17 starts in the last 3 years or something like that, what Anthony Richardson had in terms of experience. And it would just make sense. Now, you can take one stance and say the Colts were wrong. Shane Steichen doesn't know what to do with Anthony Richardson, and they're just going to keep running into a brick wall until they say, well, maybe we should just go to Joe Flacco. Now, that being said, Flacco looked like an old quarterback last week against Tennessee. He missed some throws. There were throws there. I mean, Alec Pierce could have had another 60-yard touchdown for sure. And so Joe Flacco, while he was good in week 4 or week 5, last week you can see his limitations, but I do think that Anthony Richardson, some he was always the kind of quarterback who was going to have to learn on the job. There's some quarterbacks that are better to be in the incubator, and then they're just completely mentally prepared, completely meshing with the system whenever they come out there. But with Richardson, he's going to have to learn. Think of it like Josh Allen. He's going to have to learn his limitations. He's going to have to understand what the limitations of his considerable talents are. But he's got surroundings, supporting cast, an offensive play caller that's going to make his life easier. And this could be, if everyone stays healthy, one of the best offenses in the league in the second half. I have no doubt about it. Got just a few more minutes before we go off the rails. Juju Smith-Schuster, it seems like forever ago because of the way the season moves that he had that big game. I mean, maybe Roshy Rice isn't that good. Maybe it's just the role. Maybe it's just that's what works in this offense. Or maybe Juju was a 1 week wonder and it was like a dream we woke up from. Where are we at on this?
So I do think Rice is good. I think Rice is a very good player. For me, it's Juju. He looked fantastic, and this is one where we sort of brushed aside the signing. It was an August signing. They gave him $1 million, and we were like, okay, the Chiefs got a guy who knows the system to come in and
Right.
be a depth piece. It just this team and this organization, how they were able to get all that production out of Juju and also Kareem Hunt in the same game when one guy was signed in August and the other guy was signed like 2.5 weeks before, just speaks sort of volumes to how good the Reed Mahomes system is there.
Hmm.
But for me, I think Juju is a wide receiver 3 moving forward. I think you treat him as a wide receiver 3. You can put him in the flex. There's just not target competition for him right there. We haven't seen Xavier Worthy take on an increased
Hmm.
role. He's sort of the boom bust guy. That ship has sort of sailed where, hey, this is the pathway we need for Xavier Worthy to get more weekly targets. It seems like Worthy is what he is. And Juju's going to be the guy who's like the secondary target to like a Travis Kelce. So Travis Kelce sort of shifts into the
Right.
Rashi Rice role, and Juju shifts into the wide receiver, the wide receiver 1 role for whatever it is. Um, I'm somewhat optimistic. I
Hmm.
think we need to temper expectations if we think we're going to get 130 yards every week. That's not going to happen. But can he give us 12 and a half points a game, 13 points a game moving forward? I think that's in the realm of possibilities. The guy had 88 receptions with Patrick Mahomes. Last year was sort of an aberration. He's not, it's sort of if you ask random people, how old is Juju Smith Schuster?
Yeah.
Some people might say the guy's 32 years old. He's been around forever. The guy's like 27 years old. It's
Right.
not like he's crazy old. So I'm somewhat optimistic. I added him to a number of teams of mine right after the big performance, and a couple of them before the big performance. But again, he's on your bench, so it didn't really help you. But I think post bye week, there's a lot of people who are going to be really excited to put him in their lineups, and I think they're going to get the 12 and a half, 13 points per game, which is pretty nice to find for free on the waiver wire if you didn't have to pay a lot for it.
Yeah, or trade for him, because that's the
Yes.
thing. I agree with you. I mean, why? Again, sometimes it's just simple. Why argue with it? Why argue with
Yeah.
what the game is showing you is happening? Why try to come up with reasons that it's counterfeit? Um, I think that because now, I think interesting thing psychologically, we're on the couch here trying to trade for Juju Smith-Schuster last week might not have been successful, but if the exact same team lost this past week, maybe because they need a running back, maybe because they need a tight end, maybe because of their quarterback. And now it's been a week since Juju put on that show. You might be able to get him. And I would argue that most trades that would be accepted for Juju Smith Schuster will probably be a win because, like you said, the team that has him might just be looking at him as like a found quarter in your couch cushion. But I don't see any reason that it's going to slow down. So yeah, he could be one of our fantasy heroes. Um, just let's go a little. Everyone cares about our teams, right? Who have been the heroes on your teams or the goats on your teams when you look at how you're doing through 6 weeks, Theo?
Ken Walker. Ken Walker's been one where teams you have Ken Walker, and potentially teams where you handcuffed him with Zach Charbonnet, even though the cost was a little higher than you'd like with your handcuff running back. I mean, those teams are absolutely rolling, and I think that's one of the big takeaways I've had this season is the trustworthiness of Ryan Grubb with
Mhm.
running backs. This has been incredible. Ken Walker now has 21 receptions. His career high is 29. He's going to blow that out of the water. And Sig, there's a chance that Ken Walker might be the first running back selected in redraft next year. I really
Right.
believe that because you have all the older running backs. You have Bijan and Brees. Certainly, those guys are going to be right there. Jameer Gibbs certainly will be right there. But Ken Walker, he's averaging north of 20 points per game, and he looks fantastic. And even in the games where he's not effectively running the ball, they're passing it to him. So Ken Walker for me has been a really, really, really great player to have in my fantasy teams. Nico Collins before that was one where we could
Oh,
have that one's super unfortunate. So yeah, for me, it's Ken Walker. I think he's been one of the fantasy MVPs. I know Scott Barrett, who I do School of Scott with podcast, he talked about Derrick Henry being the fantasy MVP, but kind of close to it is Ken Walker because his cost was minimal this year. It was cheaper than it was in previous seasons in terms of ADP and what he's been able to give you. And you didn't take a zero in the 2 weeks that he missed either. So Ken Walker for me, I feel super optimistic about him moving forward. And any running back starting for Ryan Grubb, I think Zach Charbonnet, like Sig, you talk about
yeah.
trading. If the opposing manager has Zach Charbonnet, he's a great guy to get as a throw in because the value he would have in his contingent upside if Walker were to miss time, he's already shown it for 2 straight weeks. Or excuse me, he showed it for 2 consecutive weeks. So I love what those running backs are doing. So yeah, for me, I love Ken Walker.
Yeah, it's funny too because, like I said, early in the season they faced Denver and New England, and we saw in the offseason, and I want to put a little emphasis on something you said earlier. What really sucks if you went early tight end isn't even so much that the tight end you took underperformed, but that part of the draft was so fertile. All those running backs, Mixon was going in that part of the draft. The wide receivers that were going there, Chris Godwin was going around there. There's a potential fantasy MVP. And then we knew he was going to be in the Cooper Cup role in Liam Cohen's offense. Terry McLaurin, Lamar Jackson was going around there. So it wasn't even just that your tight end didn't pan out, but the running back or quarterback or wide receiver you were looking at probably turned out pretty good. But it'd be funny to say, well, Kenneth Walker, and you're right. The preseason narrative was Ryan Grubb is talking about him like a feature back. They're going to use him like a feature back. He plays like a feature back. And that's why you got to remember Zach Charbonnet because he's one of those running backs who plays with no regard for his own health at all. So he's going to get hurt. Even at the end of his best game as a runner this year, oh, my oblique, it'll be fine. No, it wasn't actually fine. And that's why you're right to say corner that Seattle backfield because of how Ryan Grubb's going to use those running backs. But their defense is terrible. Terrible. Oh, no. No, it's fine. The running back's going to catch 6 or 7 balls a game. Geno Smith's going to throw 50 times. He's going to check it down. Don't worry. Sometimes you're right for the wrong reasons. Sometimes you're right for some right and some wrong reasons. And this is fantasy football as we continue to do this churn. All right. Let's go off the rails here, Theo. And I've been on your show a bunch. I look forward to having you on the show a bunch. So we'll cover a lot of ground. But I have to start with one of my stock questions: is what's something else you're passionate about? What's something else if it wasn't fantasy football that you could see getting lost in?
Well, I'm actually, people always ask me like I have a basketball background. I coached basketball for a little bit, but my passion is as a team. I live and die with the United States national soccer team. That's
Oh
sort of the
wow!
team where nobody knows
I'm
about
so
this, and it's
sorry.
sort of yeah, I know this was a tough one last night. But there's been some proud moments over the years,
Yeah.
Sig, and we have some optimism with the new coach hire. But it started years back where I just sort of kind of fell in love with the team. And it's a team where if you want to, with a national team, you can watch every single game.
Hmm.
It's sort of difficult in life to commit to watching every single game for a baseball team or even a big like English soccer team, an NBA team. Like we love the Knicks in my household, but I don't watch all 82 games. But when it comes to the US, I don't miss a game. And I haven't missed a game for like gosh, maybe 20 years. So I if I miss it, I have to watch it on DVR. You sort of suffer with your
Hmm.
team. There's international soccer is a different beast. I know a lot of people love the Champions League and EPL and La Liga, but international soccer, there's something about the nature of tournament play.
Yeah.
You talk about the NFL being little 4 weeks in cup play. You're talking about a 3 games matter so much, and it's been like that with the U.S. So, yeah, the U.S. national team soccer. That's my passion. I have a big. If you want to find my car on Long Island, I always have a big U.S. men's national team insignia somewhere on a bumper sticker. I'm one of the few. So that's my team, Sig. That's my
Yeah.
my passion.
There's been some moments. I love international soccer.
Yeah.
I think it's incredibly compelling theater. It's unbelievably compelling theater. And didn't as a quick let's drill down on the U.S. for a second though, because didn't they have a controversy over the last couple of years that is pretty much like what happens in your kid's little league, where it's like the parents say you're not playing my son enough, and then I know somebody that's going to get you fired. Does that all got cleared up? Are they a dysfunctional family right now?
Yeah, I think that the Greg Berhalter sort of wore out his welcome. I think that a lot of the dysfunction when you look at international soccer teams goes to the manager for better or for worse. You've seen it, and it's not just us. Mexico's gone through years with like a million different managers. They're a huge soccer nation. Italy's had some issues over
Hmm.
the years. So like you've sort of made it in terms of, hey, people care about soccer when you're talking about things like this off the field, Sig. You weren't talking
Yeah.
about this, what's going on off the field in US soccer in like 1998. So it shows like kind of how far we've come, that that there's a beef between Gio Reyna's parents and Greg Berhalter, and why is Gio Reyna not playing in the World Cup? Maybe it's because Greg Berhalter can't get along with him, and there's a sort of schism with the team. Uh, the Berhalter era was mixed because it was sort of the collective longest period of time that we dominated Mexico, which really matters for us because that's our rival. It's very settled. Mexico and the U.S. care about beating one another. El Clasico is a massive, massive game, and we sort of own them for a number of years. We beat them in the Nations League, we beat them in the Gold Cup, and we had a team that was sort of trending up, and they were trending down at the same time. So Greg did some good things there, but sort of the England draw was
Hmm.
maybe the peak for the Greg Berhalter era. So we sort of wanted more. But now we've gone out, we've spent a bunch of money on a manager. We have Pochettino. He was fantastic at Tottenham, had Tottenham's best ever team. Well, not best ever, but their best team in like 30 years
Hmm.
was with him in terms of where they finished. They made a Champions League final. So I think we went out and did that. We'll see how we do in the World Cup. We get to host a World Cup, so yeah, I'm really excited about that one. We lost one last night, but it was to Mexico in Guadalajara. That's the first time they've beat us in like 3 years.
Okay.
But we had a bunch of replacement guys, and he's had the team for 4 days in a camp. So I didn't put much into that. We played Panama a few days before. There was more positives there, and we had a number of our main guys. So yeah, that's sort of my secret passion. Some people know about it. I know Matt Kelly at Player Profiler, he knows about it, and certain other people do.
Hmm.
Certain people really don't like the soccer, Sig. It's sort of like a disconnect we have in football. But I think you'll find the passionate people really do exist, and there are international soccer fans that are also big time fantasy football people as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Well, and I think that football and football, the difference is football happens in these small bursts of incredibly meaningful action, and then you wait. And soccer is long stretches of waiting for. It's like fishing. You're just gonna wait. It takes more. I don't want to say passive observation, but you it's a game that requires patience to really appreciate. But international soccer is incredibly compelling. I recommend everybody one of the original 30 for 30s that's just a tremendous documentary, not just a tremendous sports documentary, is the two Escobars
Oh, it's
going back to
fantastic. It's great.
an incredible, incredible film. Um, and you are representing your nation. And I think we understand the fervor. I think college football is probably the closest to this in our country, where I mean it is bigger than life or death. Everything you do is written in the book of forever because you're representing the flag or you're representing the colors or the uniform. And to make it even more interesting is you're hinting at most of the time these players aren't playing with each other. They're playing with their club team. So these teams come together at these important times of year, the Euro Championship or the World Cup, and they have to make it all happen in a short period of time, a lot of pressure because everybody's watching. I think we don't understand that in these countries, Pittsburgh was like this at the heyday of the Steelers. Everything comes to a stop. You could walk down the middle of Main Street. Everything comes to a stop when the national team is playing, especially in the World Cup. And then what I really like about it, Theo, is generally you can see that the way the team plays, the style of the team, the traits or the qualities that they are trying to leverage to get a win is indicative of the national character. So they really
Yeah.
belong. When you watch my origin story of falling in love with international soccer was the 1990 World Cup in Italy, watching Cameroon, this upstart team from Africa, playing England, and it was Roger Mila for Cameroon would come in at the end of the game and somehow score. And it was either the round of eight, I think it was the round of eight against England, and he came in and scored in extra time. And then Lineker scored twice after that and dashed their hopes. But on that stage, you think about history, you think about how these powers and these forces, the Olympics gives you some of this too. It's a level playing field. It's an actual level playing field, and sometimes true magic can happen, and it's always memorable, and it's always incredibly emotionally charged. Other than the U.S., what's a team you find yourself rooting for?
So I have some friends that are Colombian,
Hmm.
so I would watch Colombia national games. I live on Long Island, so there's a very large Colombian community that live in like Queens.
Huh?
It's like so if you go, there's certain
Incredible food. Queens is where all the good
100%.
food is.
Oh, Queens is great, but if there's certain areas of Queens where you bring up, like, the national teams, and I don't think people necessarily associate this, but there's bars that are Columbia bars that are,
Right.
like, go nuts. So yeah, I'll say, like, as a European countries that I would root for, a couple friends who are, Azzurri fans, so we kind of
Hmm.
support Italy a little bit, support Colombia. It's sort of you'll find a lot of, like, people that are US fans that support a second team because of like their lineage. So
Yeah.
that's sort of for me it. I'm US through and through, but I have a good buddy who's this summer we had an opportunity to watch the England game where
Mm,
they were able to win on the bicycle kick by Bellingham, and I was with English people for that, and maybe with Colombia when they beat Argentina, with Colombians for that. So it's sort of like it's the raw emotion for those sort of countries get their wins, and to be able to kind of be a part of that is very very cool in international soccer. And it's also it's like there's no other sport where you can really maximize your resources and a sort of a lower population country can beat a larger
right.
population country consistently. You think about like the country like a Croatia, a country like a
Exactly.
Uruguay. It's like you can be organized, you can identify the best players in your country, you can have a system that can produce more of them, and there's no reason we can't beat people that are 10 times our population. Like Uruguay is an absolute machine, and they have such a low population of people, and they continue to put out star after star. So I think it's kind of like that in college football a little bit as
Right.
well. Like if you put the resources in, you're going to get this. If you have organization and you're thoughtful in your approach and your organization, and you have some talented players, great things can happen. So yeah, it's a really fun sport. I wish we would have beat Mexico last night. I'd be a lot more enthusiastic about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll beat them next time. We'll beat them next
Exactly.
time.
There's always a
Yeah.
next time, and my favorite of what you're talking about, I think of the Iceland run in the
Oh
Euro,
yeah.
and the announcer whose voice would go up 2 octaves when they would score and stuff like that. So we keep believing because there is always another time. And speaking of thoughtful and incredible analysis, if you don't know the OG fantasy, Theo, it was great to spend this time with you. Great to spend time with our people because we're here with you. It's only week 7. We're just at the halfway point of the fantasy regular season. A lot more to come. We're going to be with you through all of the thrills and chills. We're going to cry. We're going to cheer and hopefully maybe win a championship because you're so classy.